The greatest lessons come at the greatest price. Think about some of the most powerful lessons you've learned in life. They cost you a lot to learn. And in fact, one of my all-time favorite questions I ever ask when I get the privilege to interview somebody that I really respect and I'm trying to learn from, I'm consistently looking for mentors, coaches, people to speak into my life. And one of my favorite questions to ask is this. Kind of after I've asked several questions, I'll kind of conclude my interview with something like this. What are the one or two lessons you've learned that cost you the most, that you often don't share because you don't think that the person you're sharing with would appreciate how much it cost? And I just pause and I let them think about it. Usually they go, wow, that's a great question. And then the answers I get are incredible, because what they're doing is they're digging deep into pain, into the things that hurt and cost them a lot, right? Because the greatest lessons come at the greatest price. And so I want to share something with you, a lesson that I haven't really learned well until recently, but as I learned it, I discovered how life-changing and transformative this lesson has been. And it has profoundly impacted my life. And so what I'm hoping is that my pain becomes your gain. All right. Now, it will require us to stir a little bit of pain. My goal is not to cause you pain, but to allow you to dig a little deeper and recognize the pain that you're already feeling, that you've already been experiencing. And what do you do with that? Go back to the moment. You've all seen it, whether it's been in a movie or you've actually firsthand experienced it because you were the mom in the hospital giving birth. But for every one of us, we know the moment, right? A mom giving birth, and when the little baby is born, what is the first sound that you hear? Is it laughter? Is it the cooing and the awing? Is it the first word? The little baby just comes out and says, "Mommy," right? No. You know what it is? It's a cry. And the louder and the sharper and the shriller the cry, the better. In fact, some of you, your heart's broken because you didn't hear the cry. The baby comes into the world crying, and that's not the last time you hear a cry. In fact, what we know is that life is pain, to quote the Princess Bride, right? Life is pain, life is full of sorrow and crying. Now, not every cry is bad, right? When something great happens, sometimes people cry. I mean, I think particularly women, they will cry more than guys. You know, they're excited and they're crying. And some of us guys are like, wait, is this good? Is this bad? I don't know. You're watching a really nostalgic movie or a really touching commercial and you got tears running down your face. Not all crying is bad, but I will say that life is full of sorrow and crying. In fact, you could argue that, it's human to cry. Now, we don't all cry the same way. In fact, I kind of fit the category of someone who I don't do a lot of crying. It's not that I don't want to cry. In fact, I've even said in my home, sometimes it'd be a lot easier if I could just cry because I could get it out. In fact, they've demonstrated there's a lot of scientific benefits to crying. You know how much your body builds up unhealthy toxins when there's stress, like cortisol. And you might not realize this, but your tears actually release an extraordinary amount of those toxins. They've done this research. In contrast, sweat does not, it's about 10 times less effective at purging the toxins out of your body. But some of you cry it out while others of us sweat it out. And I would kind of put it in the same category. You're trying to get it out of your system. And some people, maybe in a less healthy way, they get out their pain through anger or other destructive means. But if you keep it in, right? If you bottle it up, if you repress that, what does our pain, our hurt, maybe repressed anger become? Well, it often becomes depression. It can become despair. Right? If we internalize it, then often what it does is it can metastasize into unhealthy coping mechanisms because we're trying to treat something that we can't recognize or put our finger on, but we're harboring and carrying pain. When we talk about addictions, right? Particularly in America today, where we've got an opioid epidemic, whether it's issues like Oxycontin or heroin or fentanyl, right? They're pain medication to treat a deep internalized pain that we don't know what to do with, dealing with our cry. Because we've all experienced profound hurt. And I don't need to go through the list of all the things that you've experienced, whether it's loss or grief, betrayal, rejection, right? You've gone through financial heartache. You've been broken in so many ways. And some of those situations are wounds that are deeper than others. And so what do you do so that you're not internalizing it? You're not using numbing behaviors or addictions to just mask the cry, nor are you just kind of crying it out, but it doesn't resolve anything. Is there a way to actually address our pain in a way that allows us to move forward? And so I want to introduce you to a biblical idea called lament, because the Bible offers us a pathway forward. In fact, you say God, through his word, offers us a way forward. And so, in fact, there's an entire book of the Bible called Lamentations. It's a book of laments. It's written by the prophet Jeremiah as the nation has gone. It's been defeated in war. It's been taken, Judah has been destroyed. People are being taken into exile. And the prophet is crying out in laments, in pain to God. It's a difficult book to read, but it's also powerful because it gives us a tool. Now, we're not going to look at Lamentations. We're actually going to jump into a psalm because Jeremiah is not the only one that did this. In fact, our King David became an expert at writing laments. And so that we don't know the story or the background to Psalm 13. It's one of the many laments of the Bible. You have Psalm 3 is a lament, Psalm 13, and Psalm 22, and you can just keep going. But this one, there's probably several moments in David's life where this psalm could have been written. Times when his enemies were out to get him. Times when he was running for his life. Times when he felt like the deck was stacked against him. Times when he felt like fate was not in his favor, and maybe even God himself was against David. Maybe God was even causing the pain and the suffering. And so David writes Psalm 13. And what I want to do is just read it to you. I'm going to read it slow enough for you to, as you listen, for something to jump out to you. So as I'm reading it, what stands out to you? What jumps out from the pages of this psalm that would catch your attention? What can you learn from this Psalm of David? He writes, "How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me." There's some critical lessons we can learn from David's Psalms of Lament. Every one of them follow a very similar pattern. But as I'm introducing kind of that pattern to you, what I really want to do is this, catch your attention with this idea that while crying is human, lamenting is uniquely biblical. You could say it this way. I would say it's uniquely Christian, but this is really a Jewish tradition. So I would say it's uniquely Judeo-Christian, meaning it's something that you can only get from the Bible. Other religions do not offer this pathway. So it's something that only really people who love God and are willing to put their life path following the Bible really have as a tool. And so it's this. everybody cries, but only really those who follow God can lament. Now, you might not want to lament, but it is truly a powerful tool in the midst of your pain. And so what does that mean? What does that look like for you? Well, let me give you this. There's a book that I want to reference, and it has this kind of quote that is the idea that lamenting, or a lament, is a prayer of pain that leads to trust. The book is Dark Clouds, Deep Mercy, and it's just the idea that lamenting is a prayer that in the midst of your pain that leads to trust. You get it? That's why it's uniquely biblical, uniquely Christian. And so what is a lament? Well, it's this idea. Pain is natural. Everybody's going to feel it. In fact, every living thing is going to experience pain. But lament is supernatural. Pain is natural. Lament is supernatural. Why? Okay, here's what happens, right? Hurt, when I'm hurting, I'm looking back on pain. But when you lament, you're acknowledging pain, but you're looking ahead in hope. Did you catch that? Hurt looks back on the pain. Lament looks ahead in hope. And so what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to reorient your perspective on your pain. In order to do that, we've got to kind of tackle David's approach to pain and how he wrestled through deep issues, deep pressures, deep distress, sorrow and agony and grief and loss in his life. He lost a child shortly after he was born. He had his own son try to take the throne from him. He was chased by his father-in-law who was trying to kill him. And so he had to hide for his life. And his father-in-law was using the entire armies of the nation, all of his power, to get David. You have a long list of things that David went through. And so these laments parallel his life journey and give us a story in how to tackle our pain in hope. So let me just dive right in, and I'm going to kind of take this psalm apart, and I'm going to give you kind of 4 keys, or more than that, 4 steps, all right? And I want to encourage you to kind of get this in your heart, because this is a path to looking ahead in your pain and taking on a supernatural act of lamenting, so you're not stuck in pain, constantly looking back, or externalizing it in an unhealthy way, or internalizing it and trying to numb it and suffering through it. Some of you have carried pain for so long, grief for so long. And I'm not saying that lamenting will just remove it, but it will give you a healthy way to address it. Let's jump in. What's the first thing that David does in his lament? And actually, this pattern is the same in every one of his laments. The first thing he does, let's read verse 1. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? What is David doing? In his pain, in his suffering, when he feels like God is far away, you know what he does? He turns to God. Lament starts by turning toward God. When you're in your suffering, when you're in deep sorrow, deep grief, deep betrayal, deep stress, the first and most powerful thing you can do is to take your lament and turn to God. Right? Some people, they turn against God. You and I, because of an instinct inside of us, it's actually an instinct to deny God. You and I are hardwired in our spiritual selves. The deepest part of who we are, we have a corruption, a sabotaging force inside of us called sin that actually wants to turn away from God and do the opposite of what we should do, which is turn to God and obey and follow God. But sin, this spiritual sabotaging force inside of us that David had, that every one of us have, wants to reject God. It wants to deny that God even exists. And so if we're going to lament, the first thing we do is we turn toward God. What does sin do? It cuts us off from relationship with God and the only hope and the only help we have in the midst of sorrow and pain. And so sin, separating us from God, causing us to turn away from God toward our own desires, toward trying to numb our pain or internalize our pain, which just wrecks us and hurts others, it leads to a forever far from God. In essence, God gives us what we want, which is a life without him, which is an eternity without him. But God refused to leave us there. So it's not just that lament turns toward God. In the midst of living our lives without turning toward God, God turned toward us. And he took on our pain. He took on our sin, our sorrow, our suffering, all of the consequences of sin. Jesus brought on himself the guilt and the shame he carried to the cross, and he died in our place. He absorbed our eternal death sentence, our judgment. He absorbed our sin. And because he paid the penalty for us and he died in our place, we can be forgiven of sin. Jesus rose from the dead victorious. Victorious over physical death, victorious over eternal death, victorious over our sins. That when we believe in Jesus by faith, we are forgiven and given new and forever life. Hey, hold up. Before we talk about how to continue to live out this or practice lament, can I encourage you? Wait, this doesn't work without faith in God. Really hard to practice lament of turning toward God if you haven't yet turned to God. And so can I pause and encourage you? Would you turn to God right now? Maybe you've been angry at God. Maybe you've turned your back on God because you blame him for the things in your life. David acknowledged what was wrong, but rather than just blaming God, he turned to God and he wanted to share his pain with God. And I promise you, if you'll share your pain with God, you're going to discover a God who already embraced your pain. He took it to the cross. He died in your place. He rose again to give you victory. And the only thing you and I can do is believe in Jesus and receive his new life and his forgiveness of sin. And so can I encourage you to take that bold step right now in your heart of turning to God? We're going to put a QR code up on the screen. If you're joining us online, there's a link that we're going to put up. Can I encourage you to scan the QR code, fill out the form, let us know. Our campus pastors will follow up with you to encourage you as you begin this new journey in relationship with God. You're turning from your way of living and trusting yourself or just kind of living in self-pity. You're turning toward God. That's the first step of lament. So the next time you're stuck, the next time you find yourself overwhelmed by grief or pain, and it's not a matter of if, it's when the next time comes, right? I mean, pain is life. So it's going to happen again. The next time, turn to God. Take your pain and bring it to God. And this is what David does. David says, "How long, Lord? How long will you not turn to me? Will you turn away from me forever?" Meaning he's just sharing with God what he's feeling, but he turns to God. Here's the deal, right? Imagine you were lost in a storm. It's chaotic. It's a hurricane. You're in a boat and you're at sea and you're lost and the waves are wrecking you and rocking you. And it seems like you're going to be lost at sea, but you have a compass. Do you look at the chaos around you and go, what good is this compass? And you throw it overboard? Or do you go, this is what will guide me out of the storm or through these troubled waters? That's David. David is turning to God as his true north compass in the midst of his anguish, in the midst of his anxieties, in the midst of his troubles. So the first key, as you begin to lament, is you turn to God. You name God. What you'll discover is that you will learn new names of God in the midst of different storms. Sometimes you got to discover God as your rock when everything is being shaken. A provider when you feel like you have nothing left. You turn to God as healer in the midst of sickness and disease. You discover God as the lover of your soul in the midst of betrayal and rejection or grief. You discover God as the resurrection and the life in the midst of loss and devastation. We turn to God. Psalm 13, verse 2. How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and day after day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Do you hear it? Here's what David does. He brings his complaint to God. It's the direction of the complaint. Some people, they complain at God. They blame God. God, it's your fault. God, you did this. But what David does is what is made up, it's what makes a lament a lament. He comes to God. He brings his lament toward God, right? He's coming to God. And then he's bringing his complaints to God. God, this is what I'm feeling. God, this is why I'm feeling it. God, where are you? What are you doing? Help, right? Like he's complaining to God. Here's the deal. As I discovered the power of lament, what I discovered is I'm allowed to put words to the things that hurt most. I began to put words to the things that I feel that I'm scared to express because I feel like if I say it, I'll be acknowledging that's really what's going on inside of me. But suddenly, the moment I said it to God, it's like healing began to happen. It's like peeling away the layers of an onion that was somehow souring my heart. And just by expressing it to God, just by bringing my complaint to God, he was able to begin to heal it. I was hearing myself saying it to God. For me, I personally began to write down my laments, anger and betrayal and hurt and sorrow. And I wrote out some things that I've never expressed to God before. But as I wrote them, and I got it out of my system, it was like being purged. It was like a wound receiving ointment just by opening it up and acknowledging it. Here's the deal. Some of you, you're so scared to actually put words to what you feel because you don't even know how to get it out. But if you actually began to pray it and be honest about it, actually tell God, God, this is what I'm feeling. This is how I'm feeling. This is what's going on inside of me. God, I'm sharing it with you. It's a conversation. There's intimacy involved, right? When you share the depth of your sorrow with somebody, that creates intimacy. And what you'll discover is that when you begin to give that to God, you begin to complain to God, he leans in. He's listening. He hears you. And he loves you in the midst of what you're complaining about, what you're hurting through, the sorrow that you're carrying. He's actually saying, come, give it to me. You want to know evidence of this beyond just the psalm I'm reading? The entire book of Job is a story of a guy whose life is devastated, and he complains a lot to God. He says some really hard things. God, you're my judge, and even if I came to you, you would still strike me because I deserve it. It wouldn't matter if I try to justify myself in your eyes. You know me, and you know I'm wrong, even if I think I'm right. Job's really brutally honest. He's vulnerable. Look at Job as an example of how to lament. Okay, so far we got 2 steps. Turn toward God. So lamenting is turning to God. Lamenting brings your complaint to God. So you're going to turn to God, and then you're going to complain to him. Imagine that, right? Like we're giving you permission to complain to God. He wants to hear it, believe it or not. But you're putting words to this. You could put it in writing. Okay, but let's keep reading verse 3 and 4. Now it's going to take a turn. Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him. And my foes will rejoice when I fall. He goes like this. God, help. What does he do? The first thing he does, he turns to God. Lord, how long are you going to leave me here by myself? Here's my problem. Here's my pain. Here's what's going on. Now, help. Here's what lament does. Turns to God, complains to God, asks God for help. Ask boldly for help. When you turn to God, then you give him what you're complaining about, and then you say, God, would you help me? Every single lament follows the same pattern. God, I know you're there. I don't see you, but I know you love me. God, I don't know where you are, but I know you're a provider. God, I don't feel you right now, but I know you're good. God, I'm really overwhelmed right now with sorrow, but I know you comfort me, right? That's the turning to God. Here's my problems. Here's my pain. Here's my suffering. Here's what's going on. You put words to your lament. You complain at God. And then at some point, after you got all of that out of your system, you say, God, you've heard it. Now help. God, would you get involved in my pain? Would you get involved in my suffering? The best picture I can give you of the heart of God is the heart of a parent. A good parent sees one of their kids hurting or suffering. And one of my kids, if I see tears running down their face or I see them really upset, what does a parent do? You run to your kids, you put your arms around them. Hey, what's going on? And then you know how it works, right? They begin to shake or they can't get it out. And eventually they start sharing. And you want to help. You want to help fix it. Now, you can't fix every problem, but you know what I can do? I can hug. And I can, if one of my kids gets really hurt, I can put, ointment on, or I can put Band-Aids on it, right? Like the point is, my kids can always come to me for help, no matter what goes wrong. I had a story just recently, and I'll be careful how I say this, but one of my girls decided to go hunting and got a deer only with our car. And so that was really difficult. And right after she hit the deer, she called me and was close to the house. She didn't know what to do. And so you know what Daddy does? She basically called and said, help. I dropped everything, got in my car, went over there and helped. That's the heart of God. And, we're just human. How much more does God want to intervene in our crisis, in our tragedies, in our difficulties, right? So we cry out to God for help. And then there's one more step, right? So far, I'm trying to keep drilling it in. You turn to God. You complain to God. You ask God for help. And then let's get the last piece, because this is critical, because this is the direction of our lament. Verse 5 and 6, but I trust in your unfailing love. What's the last thing David does? I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. Here's what David does. I'm turning to God no matter what. God, here's the problems. Here's the pain. Here's my grief. Here's my complaints. And he aims it up to God. God, help. And then he goes, God, no matter what, I trust you. God, no matter what, you're good. God, no matter what, you've been unfailing. And he begins to worship God and celebrate God and praise God in the midst of his suffering. See, lament ends in trust. So you begin by turning to God. Then you complain, you bring your complaints to God. Then you ask God for help. And then you restate your trust in God. If you would begin to practice this, next time you're walking through deep pain, some of you are walking through it right now. You're walking through your grief. You're walking through a devastating diagnosis. You're walking through a financial crisis. You're going through a difficulty in a relationship that's just leaving you devastated. Here's what you do. You go right to God. You complain. You bring your complaint to God. You ask God for help. And then don't you dare just walk away. You end that lament by saying, God, here's what I know about you. And you begin to tell God how you trust him, how you believe in him, how even if your eyes don't see it, you still believe that he is the resurrection and the life, that you're my provider. God, that you've been faithful and you will be faithful. God, I trust you even when I can't see it. God, when it hurts, you're more than enough. God, you've always been good to me. God, you've never rejected me. God, you've loved me. You have forgiven me. You're gracious to me. And you've given me the promise of heaven. So God, I look to you for help. You get it? You express your trust in God. God, no matter what, I trust you. And you begin to express praise, worship. Some of you, the greatest worship that will ever come out of your mouth will come through seasons of sorrow and pain. Because you worship God differently with tear-soaked eyes. You worship God differently when things are broken. Because you're looking to God, the only one that can make things right. What I want to do is this. I want to invite you to respond. I've given you a tool. It's a sacred language called lament. Some of you, you need to take time today, right now, Some of you, maybe this week, you need to take some time for an extended prayer time to actually write out a lament. You can read Psalm 3, Psalm 13, Psalm 22, Psalm 44, or 42, 44, Psalm 60, Psalm 77, any of those Psalms, and you can put your name into them. I want to read Psalm 13 again. And as I'm reading it, maybe make it your own. Personalize it. Look on me. How long, Lord? He says. How long, Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle my thoughts day after day? Have sorrow in my heart. How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. And my enemy will say, I have overcome him. My foes will rejoice when I fall. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. I will sing the Lord's praise, for he has been good to me. Would you join me? Let's pray. God, thank you that you did not just leave us in pain. Jesus, you came willing to die on a cross, and you gave your life to forgive us of sin and give us life. You absorbed the judgment of our pain. You took on our death sentence. You died in our place. You rose to give us victory. But God, that doesn't exempt us from sorrow and pain in this life. So God, would you begin to heal our hearts by helping us to practice this sacred language of lament, where we can just simply turn to you. We can bring our complaints to you. We can ask you for help. And then we can reconfess our trust in you. God, would you heal hearts right now? Would you begin to comfort places where people are deeply broken as they give their complaints to you? Would those words expressed begin to bring healing to hearts? And God, as people state their trust, would it build their faith? In Jesus' name.